comic book fans, and welcome from Comic Boss One. Okay, so today's vid is an answer to some requests that people have made as to what my collecting stroke investment philosophy has been. This video is probably most useful for someone who's been collecting or interested in comics for a couple of years and has some of the basics down but isn't a veteran yet and would like some focus on how to invest, either to avoid making mistakes or to maximise the return on investment. Now, I'm not saying this is right what I'm about to say, my advice. I'm simply saying that if this was me now starting out over again, then this is how I'd go about collecting and investing in comics today. What you choose to do is just as valid, okay? And it's got to be what's right for you. I don't want anybody taking offence at anything that I say. I don't mean to sound dismissive about any comic that you, or I for that matter, have in my collection, because I will have it in my collection if I'm talking a bit, more than likely about it. I'm just very honest and I'm very plain speaking, but genuinely, I have never met a comic I didn't like, okay? And my bank account will testify to that, but that's the honest truth. I love all comics, and they should all, in an ideal world, we'd have them all in all our collections, okay? Anyway, in my mind, the key word should be, in terms of investment, value. If you're investing to make a profit, don't fixate on grades. You should fixate on value. It's been my guiding philosophy, my guiding principle throughout all my collecting. A lot of people pay a lot of money to have the highest grade. Nothing wrong with that, especially if you're a collector. But as an investor, this may be the riskier and potentially more disappointing strategy. Collectors often pay what I refer to as an emotional premium prices. This occurs when they have to have the book in the highest grade at any and all costs. In many cases, this comes down to the basic economic theory of demand and supply. Higher grade books should be less likely to occur the further back in publishing time you go. Therefore, if demand is high and supply is low, then the power is with the seller when it comes to determining the price. Nothing wrong with that. I believe in the free market system. I apologise now, by the way, for the economic guff. That is part of my background. Reaper, in a recent video, highlighted the dreadful condition of some low-grade books. People said he's having a go at low-grade investors. That simply wasn't true. He was highlighting the plain truth that not all low grades are created equal, and not all low grades represent the same value. Now, that's an obvious observation, and a correct one. And as Reaper said himself, he has low-grade books. I have low-grade books. I love low-grade books. It all depends on the value. And when I say value, I mean, of course, value for money. A classic example is Alex the Comic Hoarder's 1.0 Showcase 22. Around $700 I think he paid for it, and the best presenting 1.0 you will ever see in your life. Honestly, it's stunning to look at. It's a beauty. Complete but with issues, but glorious to look at. The question here, could he make his money back on the same day even? Emphatically, yes. And twice on Sundays! However, I've also noticed that not all high-grade books are created equal as well. Certainly this is true in terms of the value they represent. A little while ago, I watched a video from, I think it's the guy from, is it sellmycomics.com or sellmycomicbooks.com? He's the British guy, so therefore he is awesome, of course. And I'm not biased, and he was suggesting the consideration of a this or that like approach, and he did. He's got a series of videos titled This or That, in that for the same price as a near mint copy of New Mutants 98, you could get a low grade but nicely presenting copy of Avengers 1 at that time. Now look at what's happened to the bubble of New Mutants 98. I, as a collector, I have a couple of copies, but I didn't pay the high risk near mint price. By the way, if you've got one that's near mint and you've had it for a long time, completely, I'm talking about investing now. Well done to you, by the way. There is no shortage of high grade New Mutants 98. Indeed, there are potentially thousands in higher grades. Hulk 181 is another where there is not a shortage of higher grades. However, and this is an important however, the exposure this character and the cover to that book has had over decades ensures that although there are higher numbers of high-grade copies, the level of demand for the book exceeds the level supplied by many multiples. And this is no short-term bubble. Obviously, the more scarce the book or grade, the scarcity of the higher grades in that book, then the more important the book is, then you are likely to be safer spending more money. I'm not attacking you if you've got a high grade copy of New Mutants 98. Like I said, I salute you, and that is an awesome book. Okay, and you can hear it in my voice, absolutely being genuine. Or any other book for that matter, similar kind of placing. If you're happy with the price you've paid for it, for that book, then that represents value for money, and that's my point. This is especially true if it's your grail, okay? So you've got to distinguish between the collector and the investor, okay? Now, I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive of one another, but I'm just saying it's part of the consideration as to whether it represents value to you. You know, you're looking at the time it takes for you to get your money back if you're flipping a book or whatever, or if it's a long-term investment, against, you know, the value of owning the book if you're a collector. And I'm pretty sure you get that if you're a collector. The emotional premium paid represents value if that's the book you've always wanted, and it represents perfection to you. My warning is for those buying solely or mostly for investment purposes. On an investment front, I think books on the level of New Mutants 98 represents an excellent short-term investment opportunity, and the perfect flipping book or books are a great and highly priced key for a collector. But with these types of books, they require a little more attention and monitoring the market, as the market value can be more susceptible to market trends. Whereas some of the traditional mega keys are perfect for the safety of people who want something to weather any storms over a long-term period. My spending philosophy has been not to buy into grades, but to buy into value. My strategy echoes something I think another YouTuber has hit on in recent videos when he confidently announced that he'd revised his top 12 goals for 2018. You know who you are. And when he later said that he'd had a change in direction, which I thought was, you know, brave and confident to do that in a relatively short space of time, I also thought it was the right decision as well. Looking at the timing of the vids that he was making and the books he's got, or is getting, wink wink, and I'm looking forward to the unveiling very much. I think he's recognised very astutely, I think he's been aware of it for a long time, if I'm honest, but he's really acting on it, he's really focusing now on that the highest value, that is to say value for money, doesn't necessarily come from grade alone or minor keys, but rather from solid blue chip books. And I'm guessing, but I think he and others are reaching the opinion, or have reached it for a while, that true long-term rewards are going to be more lucratively reaped from skipping some of the minor keys, which can prove a distraction from focusing on the big blue chip books. This is, for me, the safest strategy, focusing on those big blue chip books. So if you're starting out, you know, and you're looking at the top of the pile there, if you will, at those books, and you're collecting as you're going along, you're spending a lot of money, you're saving up, and you're investing it in these lower level keys. Nothing wrong with that, especially from a collecting. I've done it myself, especially from a collector's point of view. And the collector in me will take over and take precedence in many respects from the investor in me. But it's something that you've got to keep in the back of your head, especially if you're going into it with a good dose of investment behind your motivation. It represents an issue, this then, to collectors who by nature want their habit to be constantly fed and have mass or quantity to their collections. Very often you hear how many thousands of books we have. I'm no better, believe me. But from an investment perspective, you might be better focusing on affordable, that is to say, you know, what is an affordable price to you, and an undisputed, focusing on an affordable and undisputed mega key. I have a lot of books that garner respect from other collectors, but some will say, oh, and I'm sorry to use the same example, I have it, I love it, and I want it in my collection. And, you know, and I understand why it's so important, but like you mentioned New Mutants 98, and it gets, I think, a bit of unfair criticism. People will say, oh, Deadpool, I don't like Deadpool, all right? And they discount it in many respects because they don't want to buy into it. And yet, with a genuine mega key, whether you like the individual book or the characters or whatever or not, there is history, importance, and proven longevity in their value. At a basic level, if you say you have an Avengers 1, an X-Men 1, a Hulk 1, an AMS 1, AF-15, Showcase 4, Showcase 22, or Brave and the Bold 28, whatever it is, these books command instant understanding. They don't need to be explained. Collectors know what they are, what their importance is, and what values they command pretty much instantly, or have at least an idea. There's others I've omitted, but you get the gist. These are the big blue chip. These are the big blue chips that will always do well. If you get into any of these books, you'll see a return in the long term. If you buy at a low enough price at each grade boundary, whatever that grade boundary is, you'll even see a return in the short term as well. I actually know a guy who bought an FF1 a very short time ago, and we had a little conversation. I said, I didn't know Fantastic Four was your, FF1 was your holy grail. He said, it isn't. I said, why are you spending that kind of money then? And it was a hefty price tag that he paid. It was lower grade, but it was still a hefty price tag. And he said, well, it's FF1. He says, it is a grail, isn't it? It's a mega key. It's, this, that, and the other. And it transpired that he'd read about 10 books in his lifetime. And this is a guy who's just a little bit younger than me by a couple of years. So he's in his mid-30s. And I was like, my mind was blown in some respects. And I think you've got that kind of conundrum verb, that little thing going on, equation going on between, collector and investor. He made a good decision and all that kind of stuff, but he's not interested, and he doesn't need to be to buy into that book. And you don't need to be to buy into other books that are kind of lower down in terms of, pedigree or whatever that's attributed to them. But it's one less barrier, if you know what I mean. And those mega keys, those big blue chip books, they don't have those barriers to investment in respects. Their appeal is universal, or more universal. The only barrier that they have is price. But you see, again, it's like with the example I gave you before, choosing between one book or another. They both have that barrier in certain respects. For some books, it's become very expensive to get these books, which are hot, but not necessarily got that longevity or long history and pedigree. Again, not a criticism, it's just an observation. Okay, so I've been buying from day one with the intention of a long-term investment. So when I buy, I think in terms of the next 20 years. Now, Reaper suggested that the heat has gone out of Avengers 1. I own Avengers 1. He's right. Looking at the immediate future, how could this book possibly see the same kind of growth it did a couple of years ago? However, if looking at a longer-term view of this book, while also considering the cyclical nature and nostalgia, and what we've witnessed with properties such as Wolverine, Transformers, Spider-Man, etc., often these properties which go through periods of mass publicity and appeal, they come back. Cyclical, like I say, Avengers is perhaps one of the best placed titles to benefit from this kind of nostalgia. Thinking about it, the first film alone made $1.5 billion plus. Then you've got the other movies, you've got the other merchandise. It's billions. When it's all totted up. And more importantly, in some respects, from an investor's perspective, the brand has touched the lives of many more multiples of children and has had a massive cultural impact that in time will, as we've seen before, more than likely, with Transformers and stuff like that, more than likely will result in future adults wanting to reconnect with their childhoods. I call this the childhood nostalgia premium driver. The childhood nostalgia premium driver. And in 20 years, as we've seen in so many previous examples, I believe that Avengers Issue 1 and the Avengers run will benefit from a huge drive in interest. And there'll be other titles. It's not just Avengers, but I'm using it as an example. This may or may not benefit me, but it will benefit my son, assuming I keep hold of the books, which I intend to. Remember the importance of the Avengers' success in widening participation and interest in the hobby. Overnight, relative to my lifetime, comics turned from being something avoided in discussion to being sought out and proud bandwagoning taking place. So all of a sudden, everyone was a comic book fan, weren't they? Yeah, you remember, you've seen that transition, and there's so many people now that are, comic book fans that, well, I'll leave that one for your